We'll get started in a couple minutes to see if anybody else comes and join. We're going to be talking today about leveraging global markets and innovative finance for food systems resilience, a look at East Africa, just in a moment. Welcome everyone to our side event today on leveraging global markets and innovative finance for food systems resilience, a look at East Africa. I'm excited to bring a panel to you today of a couple of honorable guests that we have, as well as I'll start off with some framing remarks before we have this discussion. As we get started, this side event, at least in part, was motivated by the CGIAR being accredited recently for the Green Climate Fund and thinking about how we can be putting together an innovative Green Climate Fund proposal in East Africa. We also have partnered with Planet Tracker, who's bringing a perspective from the global level, looking at the credit rating and the ability of countries to be bringing finance in, and how we can be linking these two different aspects together of the sort of global financial markets with Green Climate Fund proposals and real implementation of climate finance investments on the ground. So as I start, I thought I would give a few framing remarks at the beginning about what the Green Climate Fund is looking for to frame the discussion that we have today from the global down to the local level. And the Green Climate Fund recently put out a guidance document for agriculture and food that I thought would be helpful for us to be thinking about as we have this discussion today. I'd also like to emphasize that I hope this can be a discussion. We'll have some panelists up here to discuss, but I also very much welcome the audience to be interactive, and I'll give some opportunities for the audience to make some comments and ask some questions. We also have some guests I know from Uganda in particular in the audience who I think can share some perspectives from the ground, which I think will be quite nice to see. So 2 points I want to make here at the beginning as we think about the discussion today. And one is that as we develop climate finance investments, we need to be thinking about country priorities. It's critical that that be a starting point for how we develop the investments, the climate finance investments that are made. And then it's tough to see here on the bottom, but a second key thing is that we need to be thinking about innovative design. How can we be designing innovative investments that bring climate finance down to the ground and really transform the livelihoods and the places where the investment is coming to? And so the Green Climate Fund, as I was saying, put out this guidance document recently, and they highlight 3 complementary investment pathways that the Green Climate Fund has put forward as their way of making impact through their investments. The first is promoting resilient agriculture. This is really promoting resilient agriculture on farms, those kind of technologies that we can get out and help farmers improve their productivity and their resilience, as well as mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. Second is facilitating climate-informed advisories and risk management services. These are really the services that are needed for the transformation and resilience building in these areas. And risk management services like insurance and other kinds of services that can help farmers out there. And then finally, restructuring food systems. And this is more work at the markets and the policy level to be able to make the change that's needed. These 3 going together are the 3 complementary pathways that the Green Climate Fund sees their agriculture investments as targeting. Then the Green Climate Fund sees and kind of in working in 4 different ways. So across these 3 pathways, these investment pathways that I just mentioned, the Green Climate Fund has identified 4 drivers of paradigm shift. This is sort of the how they see change happening. And as we have the discussion today with the panelists and with the audience, I think we can be thinking about both the investment pathways and these 4 drivers of paradigm shift from the Green Climate Fund. The first is transformational planning and programming. This is really strengthening capacity and getting the plans right for what needs to be invested in and how that investment happens. The second is catalyzing climate innovation. This is more about the technologies and the innovations and putting effort into developing innovative investments that can have impact on the ground. The third area is mobilization of finance at scale. And so this is enabling the public and the private sector to scale up the finance that they have, and how the Green Climate Fund can play a role in crowding in other finance into the space in these places where the investment is coming in. And then finally, fourth, coalitions and knowledge to scale up success. So it's not just the Green Climate Fund investment doing it on its own, but it's how that can leverage and work through other partners that can bring synergies and that can disseminate best practices, methodologies, and standards beyond the investment itself, and to have the spillover effects that they want to see there. And really putting these pieces together is the vision that the Green Climate Fund has for innovative investments across these three pathways that I mentioned, around promoting resilient agriculture, around climate-informed advisories and risk management services, and around restructuring food systems as the investment pathways. And that, again, being done through this transformational planning and programming, catalyzing climate innovation, mobilizing of finance at scale, and coalitions and knowledge to scale up the success. And so with this, I want us to reflect back on the two, I think, main points and areas of discussion that I think we can focus on today, which is, as we think about how we bring climate finance in, what are the country priorities, and then how can we be designing innovative investments to be addressing those priorities there. So with that, I'd like to invite up two guests to the stage now to have a discussion around this and to think about how we can be realizing this vision of country priorities and innovative design for climate finance in East Africa. And I'd first like to invite up the Honorable Dr. Mary Kitutu, the Uganda Minister for Karamoja Affairs. And then second, I'd like to invite up John Willis, the Director of Research at Planet Tracker. And maybe let me, we have microphones for you guys over there. To make this a bit more interactive, let me come sit down here and join you guys here on the panel. And Honorable Minister, I'd like to start with you and ask you a question about the top point I made there, which is about country priorities. And I'm wondering, where do your priorities lie when it comes to climate finance for food systems resilience in Uganda? And how do you think about mitigation versus adaptation, or even the two together, as you think about your priorities? What are some of the areas that you see as priorities for investment in Uganda?
Okay, so thank you very much. In Uganda, we have a strategy on agriculture, and that has been developed by the Ministry of Agriculture. And one of our priorities, first of all, we have levels of priorities. One, we want to have mechanized agriculture so that we can step up production. Because Uganda, we are the food basket for almost the Eastern Africa. Now, secondly, another priority that we have is to make the 80% of the farmers who are still in subsistence farming to go into commercial farming. So that is the strategy that we are looking out. Stepping up those who are already in commercial, and we have already identified, I think, around 500 farmers who are going to be given some concessions to be able to produce more than they are producing now. And here we are targeting to provide enough and feed the communities and also our neighbors. Now, when we talk of mitigation and adaptation, you know, Uganda as a country, when we talk of mitigation, we don't have the emissions. So most of our interventions are under adaptation. And here, we are stepping up, especially protecting or conserving water. So in some of the dry belts, like where I lead, the Ministry of Karamoja. Karamoja is in the northeast. It borders Kenya. So our immediate neighbors are the Turkana. And I think I came with a sample of the people I lead. So you can see, he can stand up. That is my LC5 chairperson. He's a local council. He chairs a district. He leads a political leader of a district. And that feather symbolizes, I think you are still a youth. So call them Karachunas. And these youth have their own way of identifying themselves. I'll be speaking to the youth in the next pavilion. And I'll be talking about my youth in Karamoja and how I'm trying to bring them, preserving the culture, but also making sure that they are part of the system of government to see that affirmative action is applied on all the youth in Uganda. I think that's what I had to say.
That's fantastic. I'm wondering,
I think,
would it be possible to hear anything from the youth from your
okay.
your country?
Now, before I go to the youth,
Yeah.
Uganda as a country, I talked about us pulling the people who are in subsistence agriculture. Those are normally the ones who are in the poverty bracket, out of that ditch into commercial, whereby they have both money in the pocket and food on the plate. Now, we have started on a very ambitious, I call it ambitious, because this is a program where we are pushing money to the grassroots at the parish level. And we are forming what we call the parish banks. So each parish, which has a population, chairman, what is the rough population of a parish in Uganda, since you are chairman of a district? Around the population, around 200 people, 200 to 500. 200 to 2,000 people, okay. Now, we are putting money at the grassroots to help the poor. Now, this is an affirmative action, and it is in the whole country. So I have one of the managers here. It is a pilot, and we believe if we do that, then we can transform the whole country such that everybody is producing for both export and then for also eating in the country. So I will request my colleague to just give a few highlights on how much money we have pumped into this. It is an affirmative action, and this is where we would wish to partner, because we have already provided this money, and it can act as seed money for us to look for more money in climate financing into the grassroots level. Thank you.
That's great. I would love to hear some more.
Thank you very so much, Honorable Minister, and everyone present, ladies and gentlemen. Parish development model is our government strategy, or an approach that our cabinet has passed to use, to implement, to get out the 39% of Ugandans out of subsistence economy to join the money economy. Each financial year, our government has pledged to put in what we call the parish development circle $150 in around 10,250 parishes in Uganda. It's for those who for those who actually now, they can produce for their families, but they don't have extra, maybe to take to the markets and then, like she has said, put more for savings. And we're also looking at this strategy as a way of whereby our government will use all government strategies of, say, for example, climate change. We are looking at any other partner to come and implement all their programs through parish development model. Yes.
That's very interesting. So if I get this right, you guys are setting up banks at the local level.
Yes.
Community bank SACCOs.
We
You're
are not
putting money into them.
Yes, we are not looking at only financial inclusion. It is a whole of government approach.
Great. And
so
how
we
much
want
again?
all the government services to go to the local last unit, which we call the parish.
Yes.
Yes.
And say again, how much money is in each one, you were saying? How much money is it that gets put in?
$150. $50,000.
$150,000 per parish
Per
gets put in
parish.
for the people that your youth over here was just mentioning.
Yes.
Would the youth, would it be possible the youth say anything about how this is being used? Would that be, is it?
Thank you very much. I think I want to appreciate my minister and the honorable member managing the parish development model. We have reached a level in our country where we want to uplift every other person. It's a good narrative. And like we said, there is already a program running where government is targeting to bring services to a parish, and some money has already come, and the rest is going to come. In my district already, each SACCO, parish SACCO, a bank that we said, has got 17 million Uganda shillings, and waiting this financial year, she came to my district of recent to promise that the next money is in the pipeline. And I think even by now, by this time when I'm here, maybe money has gone. So the target is to have 100 million shillings starting with, within a parish. And this youth have already applied, women have applied, and farmers have applied. Those who want to scale up from subsistence have applied for this money. Of course, there are also other programs. The Ministry of Agriculture is already promoting the lead farmer approach, where they are going to give some farmers money to produce a lot of grain so as to ensure food security. And you know, this has been a challenge in Karamoja. Adaptation is becoming difficult because climate variability is real. Every other day we are observing new events. Only last year, we had drought, we had fall armyworm, we had African armyworm, and we had conflict, armed conflict, which is also pushed by extreme events on the other side of the border, maybe from Kenya, for example. And so, adaptation for us is not real, it's not realistic. What we need is to build resilience so that when we have these assets within the community, people can easily bounce back. These assets that help people to bounce back. And we appreciate the government for the big dream and also for the implementation of this dream. Thank you.
Wow, that's very, very exciting. Yeah. Round of applause. And I mean, really, finance reaching the last mile, I think we can say there for sure. So thank you very much. And I'm just learning about this today. So I'm very excited for how this model is working and how you guys are bringing finance down.
Yes, so I think that is what we are doing in addition to other interventions. So, like she said, now all ministries or MDAs also work towards that, like those who provide roads, water. So it is a whole government approach, but meant to address the grassroots issues. Because one of the things that we identified was why people were stuck in subsistence farming was access to credit, especially at the grassroots, was a challenge. So that's why we have had this ambitious, like I said. We are trying it out, and if it works, that will be the model that will be running the country. Thank you very much.
Excellent. If I can just have one follow-up question, then I'll move on to a question for John after this. But as you mentioned, commercialization you want to move to, and I think it's very important the role of small and medium enterprises in these areas. Even I have colleagues here, some in the audience I know I see who are working on accelerator programs or incubator programs that can bring technologies through agribusiness, small agribusiness. I'm wondering, how are you, is this, I see the fund here and the money that's going in, this could be supporting these kind of small enterprises. Do you see this kind of thing happening, or how are you working on promoting this kind of commercialization?
Yes, now in commercialization, what government has done is we are supporting districts by providing machinery under a certain district, actually like you said, an incubation center for every district. So where there are tractors and all those inputs that go on the tractor and the modern technology, where farmers can go and access and use in sort of a farm, maybe if they are a group, like now the circle. So these tractors are being provided by government. As I speak now, I think in our budget, there could be around 200 tractors going down to the districts. These are government programs whereby we are giving out that. Now also farmers, the big farmers are also being given those concessions whereby they are supported with those equipment, because those have been the challenges whereby a farmer goes to borrow a tractor, then he has to pay the loans. But if government provides that, you can have these farmers producing for export rather than what we are having at the moment, because we have a big potential. But those have been some of the challenges which have been holding us back. And we are trying to address those bottlenecks as a country.
Yeah. Very good, thank you. But it seems like some opportunities for interventions to come in to help with those bottlenecks,
Yes.
as I hear you. Let me move on to John Willis. And John, you come from Planet Tracker, and I think we've just heard now kind of a perspective from the national level going on down to the community level and the last mile. Now, I think if we step back and you can give us a perspective from kind of the global level on down to the national, but even down to the ground too. And, you know, I know we've talked some, and you were mentioning that we've seen that we see a correlation in that countries that are highly dependent on nature and agriculture tend to have lower levels of climate resilience, lower GDP, lower credit ratings, as we think about the global markets and credit ratings. So given this, I'm wondering if you can talk about how financial markets could fund mitigation and adaptation strategies somewhat through this lens in an effort to improve food system and climate resilience and improve GDP and credit ratings for these countries.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to the other extreme. It's fascinating to hear at the parish level. So I'm going right up to the top, to the big credit rating and the big banks. And the work that we did at Planet Tracker, and by the way, all our work is on an open access basis. So if you just go to the website, you can find it. We looked, you're quite right, Evan, we looked at nature dependency. So what we did is we looked at all the countries classified by the United Nations, and we looked at all of their trade data. And actually, you've got to look at about 5,000 commodities. And what we did is classified whether they're directly reliant on nature or not. So an example would be corn is directly reliant on nature. A car is not. I mean, there are elements of a car, but you need a lot of processing along the way. And then we ranked all these countries and looked at whether they were reliant on renewables, so foods, or whether they were reliant on non-renewables, for example, such as minerals and oil. And then we looked at how people viewed these particular countries. So we did find things such as GDP growth, income dispersion. We looked at that. But let me just focus on one thing in particular, on financing. We looked at the credit rating agencies. And what we wanted to know was, how do the big credit rating agencies view nature-dependent countries? And what we found is it's brutally unfair. The more nature-dependent, the more they gave you a lower ranking, i.e. a poorer credit score. But it was even more unfair than that. If you compared OECD countries, so there are OECD countries which are very nature dependent. New Zealand, for example, Iceland, for example, Greenland, for example, very, very nature dependent. But if you compared OECD countries and non-OECD, the credit rating agencies punish the non-OECD more aggressively, even though they had the same credit rating, even though they had the same nature dependency. And that just seems to me there's something going wrong with, I don't know, perceptions, risk models, something is going wrong. So if you're nature dependent and non-OECD, you've got to struggle to get a decent credit rating, which is access to cheaper debt, which you can then, as we've just been hearing, filter right down to the parishes. So I've flicked over I've skimmed over a detailed mathematical analysis, but I think, Evan, that was the most interesting finding.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. It's fascinating to hear how the global dynamics of the markets link with the nature dependency of a country, and how that can even trickle down to the parish level, and how difficult it can be to get credit there. I know that our Honorable Minister, Dr. Katutu, needs to go shortly to an event with the youth, as she was just mentioning. And so there's one more question. I've got many questions for you, but we can always follow up later. And one question in particular that I think, especially with you being the Minister for Karamoja Affairs, I think relates very much, in that we know that climate change does not stop at country borders. And Karamoja, the area in general, even links across borders with Kenya and Uganda, Uganda with Kenya, South Sudan, Ethiopia. And so I'm wondering, what are some of the trans-border issues that you see your country, Uganda, is dealing with in this area? And do you see opportunities for developing trans-boundary climate finance investments?
Yes, yeah. Yes, it's true. Climate change has no borders. And the region which I'm charged with, that is the Karamoja region, is bordering the Turkana in Kenya. Then also you have another part in South Sudan and Ethiopia. Now these are dry belts, what I would call the semi-arid. And now with an onset of climate change, the issues even become worse. Now, as countries, especially in the East African area, at least we have an MOU with Kenya. This was signed with the presidents, that is our president and the president of Kenya. Now, for us, the ministers, we are yet to sign the framework for implementation. One of the reasons were the delays were from Kenya because they were going through elections, and we have to wait until there is new leadership in place. But in that MOU, we identified that much as we have a political border, these communities are the same. So you find that they have so much in common. They are the same tribe, they have the same cultures, and if we don't work together as countries, you may find that we may not be able to manage. So some of the issues to address in the MOE is to share resources. Like I can give an example is we have a big dam called the Kobebe Dam. This is shared between it is in Uganda, but we've allowed the Turkana come and share it with the Matheniko. So they share, they graze together. Now we also have other dams whereby the Turkana in the northern part share with the Dodoth. So they come and graze. You know, incidentally, Kenya has a harsher environment than the Karamoja side. So many times the Turkana run and the Pokots also run towards Uganda. But in this process of sharing these resources, we are seeing other emerging issues, the conflicts. Because these are pastoralists. When they come, you find them learning habits of stealing cows from these. And this is what we have been trying to solve, but otherwise, it is a good window and a good vehicle whereby we can step up the climate financing, especially of providing more water so that they have enough. And then also stepping up like irrigation around those dams. You can have grass, because when it's dry, those belts are really affected. Now, this is what we are trying to promote between the countries. We've not yet struck a deal with South Sudan and also with Ethiopia. But with South Sudan, we have been meeting unofficially. But we are yet to officialize to our marriage. But we have been meeting. But these communities, you see, they have a lot in common. And working together is actually something very important. And now I think with Kenya and this, we can promote this to be even at the East African level. And I'm sure that can be a very good window for us to access green climate financing to these regions, especially to promote the food security situation, because we have been struggling with that. If I can talk of the budget, one of the regions which has been really distorting the government of Uganda budget is the Karamoja region, because the communities will need food almost up to, relief food almost up to April next year. And that's a lot of money, because you have to give them food and also make sure that all the other issues are taken care of in the community to make sure that people don't die of food. So I think that's what I wanted to talk about that. But that region, under Uganda, we have put Karamoja at a level whereby it is a ministry. I have a minister of state. So when I'm not there, there is a minister who steps in. But on the Kenyan side, they have not yet done that. Now, those are also things which we need to lobby, because these are very fragile ecosystems. The people are very sensitive, and if you don't take care of them, they begin doing what they want, like taking guns and doing what can disturb the whole area. Thank you.
Yeah. Could I just ask a follow-up question quickly? I mean, one is I just want to highlight that you mentioned something that I hear talking about quite a bit now, which is climate security, the interaction between those that are dependent on natural resources. Climate comes in and affects it and creates security issues and conflict, which you're highlighting with the pastoralists you were saying from Turkana and Pokot coming over into Uganda. Also, I'll highlight that you mentioned the nature dependence, very dependent on the resources that are there, and so tying back to John, what you were saying. The follow-up question I want to ask is that is it just pastoralism that the transboundary connections are, or also, and I think we were talking earlier, the agriculture, that really Uganda is a breadbasket in many ways and can help provide for the region. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to the value of, or the importance of that.
Yes, now Karamoja has two zones. We have the dry belt, that's where it can be purely pastoralism. But they have the green belt, acres of land, that's government land. And on that, we have now started a program of producing seeds that are drought resistant, especially when we access more financing like under GCF. That's why I'm actually advocating for, and then Uganda, for purposes of promoting food production, trade, and all the others, and also improving on poverty. That will be that is at least one of the statements that I have from Uganda towards Food and Agriculture Organization.
That's fantastic, and I think you've hit on the key points that are needed there. The kinds of innovations like quick maturing varieties, how we get them out to farmers with different kinds of services to them, how we bring the finance in to do that with markets. The policy needs to be done, but then finance getting down to the local level, like you were saying, which is fantastic. Honorable Minister Dr. Katutu, thank you so much for coming today. Please, a round of applause. I know you need to get off to see the youth. Really fantastic. And we will be in touch about how we can be bringing climate finance in to Uganda. I appreciate it. And what's it? Maybe we do, if you'd like, I can follow up. Or we... Maybe we'll let the minister go and follow up with one more. I'd also say that if anybody has questions for John, happy to take those here. But John, maybe just one final one while we're here and while we're wrapping up the discussion. Based on what you heard, I'm wondering here, how we bring sort of the global financial markets down to a place like the Karamoja region, which has got so many complex issues that we just heard from the minister right here, but also so many important issues for climate finance and countries and people that are so dependent on nature.
Actually, I feel a great sense of humility listening to that. And maybe many of our negotiators should. It's startling, really. We've got the potential of 4 countries to work together to facilitate food production. And that makes sense to everyone, absolutely everyone. The borders that are being put in place are being found as somewhat irrelevant. I want to be careful what I say, but in the need to have food production, they're saying, no, you come over here, our climate is better over this side of the board, you develop. There are massive lessons to be learned at a high level, aren't there? And it does stimulate, I know it's controversial, it does stimulate the thought of whether, these vast COP meetings are actually able to work because there's so many parties, or whether you get smaller groups, and I must admit I was completely unaware of that, so forgive my ignorance, whether you get smaller groups to prove it can work and you develop from there. And I'm not saying I've got the answers, it's very, very complex, but I think there are a lot of lessons that international finance could take from the messages that we heard from the Honourable Minister.
Okay, well, I think that's the nut to crack, if it's me, is how we put these things together. Money's gonna have to come from around the world, but it needs to get down to that last mile of these villages in Uganda. But I'm impressed by what Uganda is doing, I have to say, and how these kind of funds are being set up, being channeled through local SACCOs, community credit and savings associations, and then how we could be bringing resilience building efforts into that through sort of advisory services, through technology dissemination. But then I think to add to that, what's needed and what we're hearing some, and I think what we're going to continue to hear more throughout, is how we can be then fostering the small and medium enterprises that are going around these places. As we bring finance in, it needs to be going into a local economy in these places, and how we do that through different kinds of entrepreneurial support organizations that then is tied back up to the global funds and the kind of points that you are making there. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the panel. Thank you very much, John, for the discussion. Thank you, audience, and I look forward to follow-ups because I think there's a lot of interesting things coming out of this. And I think we heard a potential for Green Climate Fund coming into the region in Uganda, Kenya, South Sudan, Ethiopia that we can be working on. So thanks everybody. Thank you, John.